on to testing this update user story. And yeah, there's kind of a lot to this function, so I think it's going to be an interesting one to test. So we are going to say update user story, and then we are going to, let's figure out what we're doing. All right, so let's look in terms of, we could either update the name or the description, okay? And then we could also not find a story to update. So we're gonna have kind of 3 different test suites for this. So I think let's start with updating name. So we're gonna find the story to update first, and then we're gonna replace the name and save it. And then we're going to return the project ID associated with that story. So I'm going to say updates a user story name and returns the associated project ID. All right, and then we're going to make an async function for our tests. All right, so the first thing that we want to do is do our inputs and our outputs, and then any kind of things that we need to mock out in between. All right, so we have const field, which we decide is going to be name. We have const value, which is going to be user story 1 edited. All right, we have our user ID. We're gonna say 1, and then, or nope, that's our user ID, so 15. And then we're gonna say const user story ID is gonna be 1. All right. Sorry, I'm drinking coffee every time I pause, if you're wondering. Okay, so the first thing that we are wanting to do is we want to have a story to update, and because we're gonna mock that, we need to make it up. So we're gonna say const story to update is going to be as user story. All right, so a user story will have an ID, which is going to be 1. It's going to have a name, which is going to be user story 1. It's going to have a description, which is going to be user story 1 description. And then it's also, if you look, we are getting the relations of feature, and then we're getting the relations of project. So that means that we're going to have feature, which is going to be an object, and we're going to say ID, sure, 1. And then we're going to have project, which is then going to have an ID, and let's just do 1. Okay? So now we have the project ID that's coming back. Now, there's other fields that we could include, but we really just care about getting that project ID at the end. Okay? So that is good. All right, so then we also need a const updated story, which I'm going to just copy this guy here, and then I'm going to change this to user story 1 edited. All right, but other than that, it should be the same. So that looks good. And then, yeah, perfect. Okay, so we then can now write our spy on logic here. So we're gonna say just spy on mock user story repository. Now the first one we're gonna spy on is find 1, okay? And we are going to mock the return value, which the return value is going to be story to update, okay? The next one that we're going to spy on is going to be just.spy on mock user story repository save, because you can see we're saving here. And we want to mock the return value, and that is going to be updated story. All right, and that looks good. So then now that we mocked both of those, we can say const result is going to be await service dot update user story, and we are going to pass in the fields value, user ID, and user story ID. Okay? We then expect that our result is going to equal 1. Okay? And I'm going to actually, I'm going to change this. I'm going to say this is user story 11, just so I can get some different numbers in here. So let's say this is going to be feature 2 on project 12. No, let's say this is going to be ID 4 on project 2. Okay, so the updated user story is going to be 11, 11, 11, feature 4 on ID 2. Just because if they're all 1, then I feel like it's not as great, okay? In terms of readability, I want to make sure I can read through this and like understand what's happening. Okay, so we expect our result to be 2. Let's go ahead and run our tests. And woo, we passed, which is great. But now we need to consider that the goal is not to just test one edge case. We actually want to test all of them. So let's add another one, and we're going to say updates a user story description and returns the associated product ID. So the field here is going to be description. The value is going to be user story 11 description edited. We'll keep the same IDs. So that's works. Here we're going to take this back, and then we're going to say dash edited. All right. We're going to mock find one. That should all stay the same. All right. So now I'm going to run the test suite, and yay, we pass. All right, so then the next one that we're going to do is going to be the use case of where we don't find a story to update, okay? So we're gonna say throws an error when a user story is not found, okay? So sure, we can leave that we're gonna try to change the description, that's fine, but then this user story to update is going to just be undefined, and there won't be an updated story either, okay? So because we won't have an updated story, we won't ever hit this save, so we don't need to mock the save. And then instead of mocking the return value as story to update, we're gonna mock it as undefined, okay? So then the results, we're actually not going to call result like this because there's not a result, it's going to error. So what we are going to do is I'm going to scroll to get the good. So here it is. Okay, so we're gonna then actually just call the function in here. And we're gonna say await service dot update user story field value user ID user story ID. All right, and then I'm going to change the user ID to 100 to make it make sense in terms of like if you're reading this as a story, okay, it's going to not be like user story 11 is associated with 15, not with 100. It doesn't really matter because these are all separate, but just so like when I look at this later, if I have one of these don't pass, it will make more sense to me as to why. Okay, so we expect it to reject, and then we want it to, trying to find it because I don't remember the logic or the syntax. Okay, update should throw error to throw. Which, haha, that makes sense, okay? Bad request exception. All right, so let's go ahead and run this test and see how we do. All right, perfect, it worked. So now let's go ahead and add some of the extra tests to each of these, okay? We'll start with the throwing the error one, and then we'll go up and update the other ones, okay? So we expect mock user story repository dot find one to have been called. And then we also expect mock user story repository dot find one to have been called with this little block here. All right. And that is going to, yep, that works. Okay, so that one has been updated. Let's go to update user story here. All right, so we expect the result equal to 2. We also expect mock user story repository dot find one to have been called, and we expect mock user story repository dot find one to have been called with, and then that same block. Okay, we also expect mock user story repository dot save to have been called, and we expect mock user story repository dot save to have been called with, and then let's go find that block of code, story to update. All right, let's go ahead and run that and make sure we're still passing. Perfect. All right, and then let's look at this one here. All right, we also then will pretty much have the same ones as here. So I'm actually gonna just copy these. And paste them here. Because my muscle memory, I feel like, is starting to get good. So I can start to copy and paste a little bit more. All right, and there you have it. That is testing the update user story. All right, let's go ahead and move on to delete user story, okay? I'm gonna just say that we're gonna keep on keeping on and not start a new video. All right, so we have delete user story. All right, so let's take a look. We're similarly gonna have multiple tests for this because you can see that first we're finding a story and then we aren't finding a story. So we'll have 2 at this point. All right, so we want to, it looks like we're passing in a user story ID and a user ID. We're finding the story, and then if we find it, we delete it and return the project ID. Otherwise, we throw an exception. Okay, so it should say return the, let's just phrase it like deletes the user story and user story found by the passed in ID and returns the associated project ID. All right, let's write this test. All right, so the first thing that we will do is our inputs and outputs. So we're gonna say const user story ID. Let's go ahead and use the same one that we're using up here, so 11. Okay, and then we're to say const user ID is 15. All right, so then the first thing that we want to mock is going to be the story to delete. I'm going to go ahead and find a story to delete and put it here. And then I'm going to write it as story to delete. All right, so you can see that we're also finding it with feature and project. So this is going to be perfect here. And then this is also going to be the same story that's deleted. So I'm actually going to just call it story so I can use it twice. All right. And then we should be good in terms of mocking. All right, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to write our spy on logic. So we are spying on the mock user story repository, and first we're spying on find one, okay? And we are going to mock the return value. The return value is going to be story, okay? Then we are going to spy on mock user story repository delete, and we're going to mock the return value, although this one honestly doesn't matter because we're not using the return value, but it's also going to just be story. And again, this is the thing where we did not test what delete actually returns. I think it returns just the story that was deleted, but this would be a good thing to actually test and be more accurate on, but we're mocking, so it's not the end of the world. Okay, so we will have a story, so it will call that delete method, and then it's going to return a project ID. So now we can say const result is going to be equal to await service dot delete user story, and then we're going to pass in the user story ID and then the user ID. Then we expect that the result is going to equal 2. All right, let's go ahead and run it. And yay! All right, so let's add our other kind of normal tests. So we expect that the mock user story repository dot find one to have been called, and then we expect the mock user story dot find one to have been called with story. All right, and then the same thing, but instead we are going to do delete. All right, let's run the tests. Oh, and we failed. All right, well, because we're not finding it with story, that's silly. All right, we're finding it with this. All right. I went a little ahead of myself and started writing too quickly. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna test the edge case of that we don't actually find the user. So we're gonna say throws an error when a user story is not found. Okay, so we have our user story ID and our user ID. We are not going to have a story that's found, and so we are not going to delete one. The mock return value is going to be undefined here. All right, and so there will be no results, and we will not call delete at all. We will still do the expecting the find one to be called with those things. And so then here we are going to do the same where we do this. All right, so we expect service dot delete user story to be called with user story ID and user ID. Let's change the user ID to 100 so it makes sense when we're rereading this. All right, I think that looks hopefully good, but I copied and pasted a lot, so we'll never know. And perfect, now we have 10 tests that pass, and I feel pretty good about our user story spec testing. All right, when we return, we will move on to feature service testing. See you in the next one.